How you doing there? Welcome back to Babble on Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Lamed Vav, Daf 36 of Masechta Chullin. Friends, Daf 36. Givaldig. We talk about when blood gets on a gourd. When blood gets on a gourd, you are shechting an animal and some blood squirts on a gourd, and the question is that blood going to be machshir the gourd to be makabel tumah? If a dead mouse now falls on the gourd, is it tumas ochlin or not? Friends, what do you think? We will see very soon. And then, after that, we discuss the tumah of chibas hakodesh. We had discussed the other day on Lamed Gimel, I believe, we had said that chibas hakodesh is machshir korbanos to be able to makabel tumah. So, if you have a korban and you shecht it, so blood or no blood, even if it's a bloodless shchita, let's say, it doesn't matter. Anyways, it would be mukhshar l'kabel tumah because of the chibas hakodesh, because of the specialness, the uniqueness, the belovedness of kodesh, of korbanos. They are automatically mukhshar l'kabel tumah. And the question is, okay, that's great, but now, if a dead sheretz falls on this meat, what is it able to now be metame? Like what kind of tumah? When we say that chibas hakodesh is machshir korbanos to be able to makabel tumah, to what extent are they? Is the tamei kodshim meat now able to be metame other things? So, anyways, that's going to be the second section of today's daf, understanding the nature of what it means that chibas hakodesh is machshir korbanos to be makabel tumah. So a very, very exciting daf we have ahead of us here today at Babble on Talmud. Friends, join me. Let's have a great time and let's learn Daf Lamed Vav, Daf 36 of Masechta Chullin. Friends, we begin on Daf Lamed Vav, Amid Aleph, the second line of the page. Tana Dvei Reb Yishmael, who was taught in the Bis Medrash of Reb Yishmael, V'dam chalalim yishtet, that when the pasuk says, and he will drink the blood of corpses. Prat ledam kiluach she'enu machshir sazorim. Okay, a little shtickle technical thing over here. That yishte is a reference to mashke, right? Like the mashkin that can be machshir l'kabel tumah, and it says dam chalalim to the exclusion of dam kiluach. This has to do with bloodletting. So dam kiluach during bloodletting is like the main stream of blood. There are, I don't know. I know the only thing I know about bloodletting is what I can pick up from the different various gemaras. But apparently, when you bloodlet, so there's different spurts of blood. Anyways, it's kind of a machlekes Rashi and Tosfos about what exactly it's referring to. But I don't want to get stuck on this. Basically, if you bloodlet an animal, so then that main stream of blood would not be considered dam chalolim, the death blood or the corpse blood, and therefore it's not machshir l'kabel tumah. Okay, if you bloodlet an animal and there's a main stream of blood, that blood is not machshir l'kabel tumah. Okay, fine. Moving on. Tanu Rabban. Hashoichet v'hitis dam al tzlas. Okay, the gourd sugya. So a person who slaughters an animal and blood squirts onto a gourd. Rebbe Omer Hochsher. Rebbe says that gourd, that bloody gourd, is mukhshar l'kabel tumah, right? Food, once it gets one of the 7 liquids on it, one of those 7 liquids being blood, is mukhshar l'kabel tumah. If a dead sheretz now falls on the gourd, that gourd is tummy. So that blood getting on the gourd is machshir l'kabel tumah. Reb Chia Omer Tolin. Reb Chia says, Tolin. What does Tolin mean? Well, we're going to have some different definitions. Well, that's part of the question. What exactly does Tolin mean? But Tolin definitely implies some level of uncertainty. Tolin, it's pending, let's say. It's pending. Again, we're going to have to explain what exactly does Reb Chia mean when he says Tolin, it's pending. What's pending? For what? For how long? Anyways, so Rebbe says that this gourd is mukhshar l'kabel tumah. Reb Chia says it's pending, tolin. Omer Boshaya, and says Boshaya, Me'achas Rebbe Omer Hochsher, Reb Chia Omer Tolin, So what do we do? So Rebbe says that the gourd is muksher l'kabel tumah. This bloody gourd is muksher l'kabel tumah. Reb Chia says it's pending. So what do we do? So ana minismoch, who should we rely upon? Bo v'nismoch al divrei Reb Shimon. Why don't we rely upon Reb Shimon? Shay Reb Shimon Omer, that Reb Shimon would say, shchita machsheres v'lo dam. That Reb Shimon says that shchita is machsher l'kabel tumah. Blood is not machsher l'kabel tumah, which would mean therefore that this gourd is not machsher l'kabel tumah, this bloody gourd, because according to Reb Shimon, blood is not machsher l'kabel tumah. Now, friends, we're gonna Amar Papa says Papa is going to try to make some sense out of what is going on. What do we know so far? We know that when an animal is slaughtered and blood squirts all over a gourd, and now you have one bloody gourd. So according to Rebbe, that gourd is mukshel l'kabel tumah. According to Reb Chia, Tolin, whatever that means. And Reb Oshaya says, well, why don't we bring in Reb Shimon, who says that when you shecht an animal, the shechita is machshir, not the blood. There's a lot of stuff that we have to kind of make fit neatly, explain really good. Amar Papa says, Papa, Hakol Modim. Okay, look, everybody agrees. In terms of the machlokes between Rebbe and Reb Chia, look, if you slaughter the animal and blood squirts on the gourd, and that blood is on the gourd from the beginning of the shechita all the way through the end of the shechita, but as we learned yesterday, the pasuk says, "Ala arz tishbechenu kamoin," that essentially we learn from there that blood of shechita is machshir l'kabel tumah. That shechita blood is machshir l'kabel tumah. So everyone agrees that if you shecht the gourd, if you shecht an animal and blood squirts on the gourd and it remains on that gourd until the shechita is complete, well, that is dam shechita. That's blood of shechita, and the blood of the shechita, al arz tishbechenu kamoim, is like water. It will be machshir the gourd l'kabel tumah. Everyone agrees. Rebbe, Reb Chia, everyone agrees. Meaning the main machlok is between Rebbe and Reb Chia, right? Reb Oshaya had said, well, what do we do? Because they're split, so let's bring in Reb Shimon. But says Reb Papa, look, in terms of the machlok between Rebbe and Reb Chia, there's no need to bring in Reb Shimon when the blood has been on the gourd throughout the shechita, because everyone would agree, even Reb Chia would agree that would be considered dam shechita, and dam shechita al arz tishbachenu kamoim, that just like water is machshir l'kabel tumah, this blood would also be machshir l'kabel tumah. So again, that when the blood is on the gourd throughout the shechita, even Reb Chia would agree that it's machshir l'kabel tumah. Where they argue is niskaneach adam bein simin l'simin. Where they argue is in the following scenario: that you slice through the trachea, you slice through one of the simanim, blood goes squirting, and it gets on the gourd. You then say, oh dear, that's a bloody gourd. So you say, wait a second, and you get a towel and you dry off the gourd, you remove the blood from the gourd, and then you get back to your shechita and you pick up where you left off and you complete the shechita. Rebbe Savar Yeshna l'shchila mitchila v'ad sof. If you remember this machlokes from the other day, that shechita the shechita begins when the knife begins to cut. Once the knife begins to cut, that's when the shechita begins, and the shechita continues throughout the slicing of the siman. Which means that according to Rebbe, the blood that landed on the gourd was shechita blood, because shechita begins once you begin to cut. So that, according to Rebbe, that blood that landed on the gourd was shechita blood, and therefore it's machshir l'kabel tumah. So he says, yesh l'shchita mitchila v'ad sof, v'hai dam shchita, and this is dam shchita, and it's machshir l'kabel tumah. Reb Chia savar, whereas Reb Chia holds eina l'shchita el v'asof, whereas Reb Chia is of the opinion that the shchita is at the completion of the shchita, which means that when you slice through just one of the simanim, that's not shchita. Shchita is at the end when you're done slicing. When you slice through one of the simanim, it's not yet considered shchita. And therefore, that blood that squirted on the gourd was not yet considered shchita blood. And you dried off that blood that landed on the gourd, and then you continued the shchita and completed the shchita, at which point it was considered a proper shchita, but at that point the blood was gone. Right, so Rebbe Savar Yeshna Shchila Mitchila Vatzov, Vai Dam Shchita Hu Reb Chia Savar, Reb Chia holds, I'm reading again, Ein El Shchita Ela Basov, Vai Dam Make Hu. And this blood, therefore, that landed on the gourd and was then dried off, was not shchita blood, it was blood of a wound. And we had said yesterday that the blood of dam magafoso, the dam of a wound, is not going to be machshir l'kabel tumah. It was a wound blood, and it's not machshir l'kabel tumah. So therefore, according to Rebbe, regardless of if you had dried off the gourd or not, it makes no difference. That blood is dam shchita, and it's going to be machshir l'kabel tumah. According to Reb Chia, it depends. If the blood was on the gourd the entire time, then it's dam shchita. If the gourd was dried off before the completion of the shchita, so then it's not dam shchita, and it's not machshir l'kabel tumah. So Umay Tolin, so what does it mean when Reb Chia says it's pending? It's pending to see what he does. Does he dry off the gourd before completing the shchita or not? Tolin Adover ad Gemar Shchita, that whether or not the gourd is machshir l'kabel tumah is pending the completion of the shchita. I'isei ledam b'sov shchita machshir. If the blood is on the gourd at the completion of the shchita, then this is dam shchita and it's machshir l'kabel tumah. Ve'ilo, but if it was dried off beforehand, well then lo machshir, then it will not be machshir l'kabel tumah because the shchita is only at the end and it was dried off by that point. So Tolin, according to Reb Chia, means that it depends. It depends if he dries it off before the completion of the shchita or not. So now what does Reb Shimon have to do with anything? Reb Shimon lo machshir, Reb Chia machshir. Why bring in Reb Shimon over here? Because after all, we say that according to Reb Chia, if the blood was on the gourd throughout the shchita, Reb Chia says that the gourd would be machshir l'kabel tumah. It would be considered dam shchita, and it would be machshir l'kabel tumah. Reb Shimon, on the other hand, says that dam is not machshir. Shchita is machshir, dam is not machshir, and this blood that landed on the gourd will not be machshir the gourd l'kabel tumah. So, what is Reb Shimon? What's his role to play here? B'niskaneach miu shavul adadi. Yeah, but when the gourd was dried off before the shchita was complete, Reb Chia and Reb Shimon would agree that the gourd is not machshir l'kabel tumah. So when the blood was on the gourd throughout the shchita, so both Rebbe and Reb Chia agree that the gourd is machshir l'kabel tumah. We don't need Reb Shimon. But if the gourd was dried off before the shchita was complete, so then Rebbe would say that the gourd is machshir l'kabel tumah. Reb Chia would say that it's not machshir l'kabel tumah. And so what do? It's split between Rebbe and Reb Chia. So comes Reb Shimon, and we learn from Reb Shimon to tilt in Reb Chia's favor that the gourd is not machshir l'kabel tumah. Marlo machshir, umarlo machshir. Both Reb Chia and Reb Shimon would say in that case, when the gourd was dried off in the middle, that it's not machshir l'kabel tumah. Havale Rebbe Chad, and therefore Rebbe, who says that it is machshir l'kabel tumah, is one. Ve'in divrei dvarav shel echad b'makom shnayim, and we are not going to accept Rebbe's position when we have Reb Chia and Reb Shimon saying that it is not Mukshel L'Kabel Tumah. Friends, I'm going to chap a shluck of tea and we are going to go weiter. Rav Ashi Omar, however, says Rav Ashi, Tolin the Olam Mashma. Rav Ashi, however, disagrees. You see, the way that Rav Papa described Tolin is he says, well, it kind of depends. Now, when he says Tolin, it just means that when Rav Chia says Tolin, Rav Chia is basically just saying, look, it depends if you dry off the blood or not. That Rebbe says that either way, whether you dry off the blood or whether you leave the blood on the gourd the entire time, the gourd will be Mukshel Kabel Tumah. And Rav Chia says Tolin, i.e., it depends. If the blood was on the gourd the whole time, then it's Machshel Kabel Tumah. If the blood was dried off in the middle of the shechita, then it's not Machshel Kabel Tumah. However, Rav Ashi disagrees because Rav Ashi feels that Tolin pending means pending forever, meaning when blood gets on a gourd, Rebbe says it's Machshel Kabel Tumah always, and Rav Chia says it's pending always. So Rav Ashi says that we have to explain Rav Chia's position of Tolin, of pending, to be indefinite until Elijah the prophet comes speedily in our days, and we can get online to ask him what happens when blood squirts on a gourd. Rav Ashi says, Rav Ashi, Tolin the olam mashma. Pending, if Rav Chia says Tolin, it means that it's in a state of pending indefinitely. V'niskaneach li Rav Chia sapukim misapkele, that actually when the blood was cleaned off mid-shchita, so if the blood wasn't cleaned off mid-shchita and was on the gourd the whole time, well then, of course, Reb Chia, like we said earlier, would agree with Rebbe that the blood is Machshel L'Kabel Tumah. But when the blood was cleaned off of the gourd mid-shchita, so we had said earlier that Reb Chia would say, Ein l'shchita el levasof, and therefore the gourd is not Machshel L'Kabel Tumah. However, says Rav Ashi, actually, in that case, Reb Chia is uncertain. That when the gourd was cleaned off mid-shchita, Reb Chia sapuke misapkele, he's actually uncertain, yeshna l'shchita mitchila v'ad sof, if it's like Rebbe, that the shchita is throughout the slicing, in which case the gourd is Mukshel L'Kabel Tumah. Ein l'shchita ela basof, but maybe shchita is only at the end, in which case the gourd is not Mukshel L'Kabel Tumah. Umay tolin lo ochlin v'lo sorfin. What does it mean, tolin? It means that we're not going to eat it and we're not going to burn it. I neglected to mention an important point, which is becoming relevant now, which is this is not just any gourd, it is a gourd of truma. And therefore, when Reb Chia says tolin, that it's pending indefinitely, it's because when this gourd was cleaned off mid-shchita, we don't know if we say, right, Reb Chia is uncertain if it is yeshno l'shchita mitrila ve'ad sof, in which case the blood that was on the gourd was blood, what was dam shchita, and it's Mukshel L'Kabel Tumah, or does he say ein l'shchita ela levasof, in which case it was not dam shchita, and in which case, right? So he doesn't know if it is dam shchita and it is Mukshel L'Kabel Tumah, or if it's not dam shchita and therefore it's not Mukshel L'Kabel Tumah. And therefore, Reb Chia says the halacha is tolin, it's pending. We simply don't know what to do. Now, because this is a gourd of truma, so if you're a Kohen, you can't eat it. If it becomes tameh, right? If it becomes tameh, so then if it becomes tameh, if you're a Kohen, you can't eat it because you're not allowed to eat truma tameya. But at the same time, you would not burn it because maybe it was not Mukshel L'Kabel Tumah. So, tolin, lo ochlin, v'lo sarfin, and when Elijah the prophet comes, hopefully the gourd will still be fresh and you can ask Elijah the prophet if you can eat it. Umay bo v'nismach al divrei Reb Shimon. And why are we saying, and now let us bring Reb Shimon in to help? Reb Shimon lo machshir, Reb Chia sapuke, sveika. They're different. Reb Shimon says, well, blood is not machshir. Of course, the gourd is not machshir l'kabel tumah. And if a dead sheretz touches it, it remains tahor. And Reb Chia says, we're not sure what to do. So why are we saying, let's bring in Reb Shimon? He's not saying like Reb Chia. Le'inyan sreifa miu shavu la'adade. However, in terms of the fact that you don't burn it, they both agree not to burn this gourd. Mar lo l'sreifa umar lo sarfe umar lo sarfe. That Reb Shimon would not be burning this gourd because he says there's no reason to. The blood is not machshir the gourd l'kabel tumah. Therefore, it does not become tameh from the dead sheretz that touched it. And therefore, of course, you would not have to burn it. And also, Reb Chia, since he's besafek about whether it was actually machshir l'kabel tumah or not, he also would say not to burn it. So therefore, Reb Chia and Reb Shimon are on the same page about not burning this truma gourd if it became tameh. Havalei Rebbe chad, and therefore Rebbe, who says that it was machshir l'kabel tumah, and therefore you should burn it. He's just a single opinion. And the opinion of one gets overruled by the opinion of two. Rebbe would say to burn it. Reb Chia and Reb Shimon would say not to burn it. What Reb Chia is saying is that in this scenario where the gourd was dried mid-shchita, so it is pending indefinitely. And if it becomes tameh, we would not eat the gourd, but we also would not burn the gourd. It is simply pending. And now we get up to the next section of today's daf, the tumah of chibas hakodesh. Let's see. By Reb Shimon ben Lakish, Reb Shimon ben Lakish asks, Tzarid shel menachis. What is a tzarid shel menachis? So my understanding of the matter is that if you have a korban mincha, a flour offering, and in the flour offering there is a clump, a dry clump of flour. And I imagine this dry clump of flour, no oil touched it or anything like that. So this dry clump of flour, this tzarid shel menachis, monen bo rishon ve'sheni, o ein monen bo rishon ve'sheni. If a dead sheretz touches this clump of flour, so would it become tameh? If a dead sheretz touches this clump of flour, would this clump of flour become tameh to now be metame other things? I guess if a dead sheretz, touches the clump of flour, I imagine it would become a rishon, and it can make other things a sheni. I assume that's the question. Well, that's what it says, rishon v'sheni, right? Oh, ein monin bo rishon v'sheni, or not. What does that mean? Ki mahanya chibas hakodesh. What was machshir this clump of flour to become tameh in the first place, right? We said it's a dry clump of flour. It never became machshir l'kabel tumah from any mashkin. So how was it machshir l'kabel tumah in the first place? Chibas hakodesh, the belovedness of kodesh, the special, the I don't know, the respect for the respect that we have. I don't know. It's a funny phrase to translate chibas hakodesh, the belovedness of kodesh. It means that because kodesh we want to treat very, very, respectfully, very, very carefully, maybe, right? Because kodesh is so beloved, we want to treat it very sensitively and very carefully, and because of that, it can become, like the highest level of purity. So therefore, it can become tameh because of chibas hakodesh. And the question is that when we say, right, ki mahanya chibas hakodesh, when we say that on account of chibas hakodesh, this clump of flour could become tameh, le'ifsule gufe le'mimna bei risha. Where am I? Le'ifsule. What? Chibas hakodesh le'ifsule gufe le'mimna bei risha v'sheni lo. Okay, fine. Again. Ki mahanya chibas hakodesh le'ifsule gufe. I'm not reading that nicely. Ki mahanya chibas hakodesh, that when we say that there's chibas hakodesh, it's only le'ifsule gufe. It's only to the extent that this clump of flour will itself be tameh, and therefore you will be unable to eat this clump of flour. But lemimna be'rishon v'sheni lo, but it wouldn't be tameh to the extent that it could be metameh other things. It's possible you can't eat it, but that's it. That when we say that on account of chibas hakodesh, this clump of flour is tameh, it just means that you can't eat it, but it won't be able to be metameh other things. O dilma lo shna, or maybe it makes no difference. It's fully tameh. It becomes a rishon, it can make a sheni, etc. So that's Rish Lakish's question. That when we say that kodesh could become tameh, is mukhshel lekabel tumah on account of chibas hakodesh, and it becomes tameh, to what extent? Is it solely to the extent that you can't eat it, it's tameh? Or is it even that it will be it can then go on and be matame other things? Now, I'll spill the beans. The Gemara is going to end at the top of Daf Lamed Zayin Amid Aleph with a teku, and it will be unresolved. But we are going to spend the next Amud of Gemara attempting to resolve and better understand this question. Amr Balazar says, Balazar, Tashma, come in here. That the pasuk says, "Mikola ochel asher yochel," and you can add the next few words, "Asher yavo olav mayim yitma." That the pasuk says in Parshas Shmini that any food that water gets on it, it will be tameh. Ochel haba b'mayim hochsher. That if liquid gets on food, then it is muchsher likabel tumah. Ochel she'eno b'mayim lo uchshar. And if no liquids have gotten on the food, then it's not mukhshel lekabel tumah. So it seems like Rabbi Lazar is pointing out that in order for something to be mukhshel lekabel tumah, it has to come in contact with a liquid. And this chibas hakodesh this clump of flour never came in contact with the liquid, and therefore it can't be metame other things. Reb Shimon ben Lakish leislei ochel babamayim. What, do you think Rish Lakish never heard about the concept that for something to be mukhshel lekabel tumah, it has to come in contact with water? Of course he did. Reb Shimon ben Lakish achi kami bayalei. What Rish Lakish is asking is, yes, he knows about the concept of being mukhshel lekabel tumah with liquids. What he wants to know is about chibas hakodesh. Chibas hakodesh ka'ochel babamayim dami olo. What Rish Lakish is asking is that there's this concept of chibas hakodesh, and when we say that this clump of flour is mukhshel lekabel tumah because of chibas hakodesh, do we treat chibas hakodesh like we would treat food that water has gotten on, and to say that it has that same level of hechsher? To which the Gemara says, yeah, Rabbi Lazar also gets that. Rabbi Lazar nami mi yisuri kroi kamer. No, what he was saying is this. He wasn't stating the obvious. What he was saying is, look, michdei ksiv v'chiyutan mayim al zera. We have another pasuk that seems to be saying the same thing. V'chiyutan mayim al zera v'nafam min nevlasim olav tameu lachem. That if water gets on seeds, gets on things that come from the ground, and then a sheretz falls on it, it becomes tamei. So we have essentially two psukim that are teaching us seemingly the same thing. When food comes in contact with a liquid, it becomes mukhshel lekabel tumah. Right? We had mikola ochel asher yochel asher yavo olav mayim yitma, and v'chiyitin mayim al zera v'nafal min avlasim olav. Two psukim be'etzem saying that when you have food that gets mashkin on it, so then it's mukhshel lekabel tumah. Why do we need both of them? Lav lemute chibas hakodesh. Is it not to drive home the point that to really be machshel lekabel tumah, to be metame other things, it needs to be with the liquid, which is why the Torah writes it twice to the exclusion of chibas hakodesh. That chibas hakodesh, while sure it's when it becomes tameh, you can't eat it, but it would not be metame other things like food that actually came in contact with water. Lo, to which the Gemara says, no, that's not why we have both psukim. It's not to exclude chibas hakodesh. Rather, chad betumas meis v'chad betumas sheretz. Rather, one of the psukim is talking about the requirement for hechsher to be mukhshel lekabel tumah in order to receive tumas hameis, and the other pasuk is saying that you need hechsher tumah for tumas sheretz. chad b'tumas meis v'chad b'tumas sheretz utzriche, and we need both psukim to say that you need to first have hechsher, be mukhshel lekabel tumah in order to actually become tummy. The ashmu'inon tumas meis, because if we only add the pasuk saying that by tumas meis it needs to be mukhshel lekabel tumah, well, I might think, okay, fine, by tumas meis, which is more lenient, a more lenient type of tumah, it's only tamei if it was first mukhshel lekabel tumah. Hasamu debaye echsher, that by tumas hameis it requires echsher tumah, and without echsher tumah, hechsher l'tumah, it would not become tamei. Mishum dit lo mitami bechadasha, because tumas hameis is more lenient than tumas sheretz in that. Let's go weiter. Aval sheretz the mitami bechadasha emalo libaye echsher. But you see, a sheretz is already mitame if it's just the size of a lentil. A sheretz the size of a lentil could already, a dead sheretz the size of a lentil, or a lentil's worth of a dead sheretz, would be mitame, whereas tumas hameis would have to be a larger amount. And therefore, since it is more lenient in that respect, maybe that's why we'll also say that it will not, something will not pick up. Where am I? No, so I might think that that's why the Torah specifically had to say that is why, because it's more a more lenient type of tumah, we say that it's only going to pick up that kind of a tumah. Something will only become tummy with tumas hameis if it was first mukhshel lekabel tumah. Without that, it wouldn't actually pick up the become tummy with tumas hameis, because tumas hameis is more lenient in that it requires a larger shear. But tumas sheretz, which is more stringent, in that already at the size of the tiny shear of a lentil, it could already be matame things. Maybe it's matame things even if they hadn't first come in contact with liquid. Therefore, we also have to say that no, even by tumah of sheretz, it would first have to be mukhshel lekabel tumah. V'ashmin on sheretz, and if we would only have sheretz, I would think that it's mishum de lo mitame tumas shiva. Well, in a certain respect, tumas sheretz is less severe than tumas hameis, because tumas hameis is a 7-day tumah, whereas tumas sheretz is a 1-day tumah. Have a meis de mitame tumas shiva emalo libay echsher, but tumas hameis, which is a more stringent tumah, it's a 7-day tumah. Maybe it's mitame things that weren't first mukhshel lekabel tumah tzricha. Therefore, we need to teach both by tumas sheretz as well as by tumas meis, that in both scenarios, whatever is becoming tummy will only become tummy if it was first mukhshel lekabel tumah. I'm going to chap some tea and we'll go weiter. Now, Mosiv Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef asks the following question: Reb Shimon Omer, Huchsheru b'shchita. That Reb Shimon says, right? Reb Shimon has said in our Mishnah that when you slaughter an animal, it becomes mukhshel lekabel tumah just by shechting it. Just by shechting it, it's mukhshel lekabel tumah. Now, mukhshel lekabel tumah means that if the meat, right, you slaughter an animal, and Reb Shimon says just by shechting it's mukhshel lekabel tumah, which means that if it becomes tummy, it can be mitame other things. And there, it's not coming in contact with any liquids. Just the shechita was mitame, was mukhshel lekabel tumah. And yet, we're saying that it could go on to be mitame other things. So let's say that chibas hakodesh also can go on to be mitame other things, even though it's not coming in contact with any liquids. So huchshu v'afilu lemimnei behu rishin v'shemi. That when we say in the Mishnah that Reb Shimon says that just by slaughtering the animal it becomes mukhshel lekabel tumah, that means it's mukhshel to be mitame a sheni, a shlishi, other things. But amai ve'ha lav ochel haba b'maymu, but it never came in contact with any liquids, and nonetheless it's mitame other things. So therefore, chibas hakodesh, argues with Yosef, would also be mitame other things. It wouldn't just become puzzle. It wouldn't just be that you're not allowed to eat it, but it would, even if it touches other things, it can make them tamei as well. Abaye says, no, don't ask a question from Reb Shimon's opinion by shchita, because asa'u ke'echsher mayim dirabanan. No, that's only a din dirabanan. That when we say, when according to Reb Shimon, you slaughter animal, it becomes mukhshel lekabel tumah even without coming in contact with water, and it can be metame other things. That's metame other things midirabanan. Metame other things midirabanan. So if you slaughter an animal, and according to Reb Shimon, it automatically becomes mukhshel lekabel tumah, the shechita itself. So now, if it becomes tameh, and then it touches truma, let's say, so it would only be that truma that it touched would only be tameh midrabanan. It would only be metame other things midrabanan, which means that truma you wouldn't eat it, but you also wouldn't burn it. So it's midrabanan. Reb Zera says, Reb Zera tashma kamnir abotze legas. Somebody who's harvesting grapes and taking those grapes and putting it into a basket. And those grapes, some of the juice from the grapes gets on the outside of the grape. Now, we've learned a few Mishnayos recently from Masechta Machshirin, and we know that in order for liquids to be machshir food, lekabel tumah, you have to, right? It has to be either tchilasu b'ratzon or sofu b'ratzon. You have to want the liquid, or you have to want the grapes to become, to be in the liquid. In this case, you have neither of those things. When you're harvesting grapes, you want the liquid, you want the juice to be in the grape, not on the outside of the grape. And yet, Shammai Omer Huchsher. Shammai says that when harvesting these grapes, if there's any juice on the outside of the grapes, that juice will be machshir, the grapes, lekabel tumah. Hillel Omer Lo Huchsher. Hillel initially says that the juice is not machshir lekabel tumah. V'shasik le Hillel the Shammai, but he then agreed with Shammai. But Amai. But this shouldn't be considered, this should not be considered food that came in contact with the liquid, because this was not liquid that you wanted. And even so, we're saying that it is going to be metame other things. So therefore, let's say that by chibas hakodesh also could be metame other things. Abai said, again, just like he had said in the previous case of the shechita, that when we're saying here that these grapes would be metame, it's only mi derabanan. Rav Yosef says, Rav Yosef, look, Abaye, amina loch ono huchshru b'shechita ve'at omart le'asau ki'echsher mayim. Says Rav Yosef to Abaye, look, I brought you an example that there was no, there was shechita, there was no contact with liquids, and it's metame, and you said it's only midrabanan. Okay, fine. Reb Zera now brought you an example of the liquids on the outside of the grapes, and once again, you said, right, v'amar lach Reb Zera v'amart le asau ke'echsher mayim. And once again, Abai, you said, yeah, it's only midrabanan. Fine, I get the point, says Rav Yosef. L'Reb Shimon ben Lakish nami asau ke'echsher mayim. So, Abai say the same thing about Reb Shimon's question about chibas hakodesh. That by chibas hakodesh, is it metame other things? Answer, just like by shechita and just like by the juice on the grapes during harvest, chibas hakodesh would be metame other things midirabanan. Amar le, to which Abai says to Rav Yosef, Atu Reb Shimon ben Lakish, Lislos kami bayale, but that's not what Rish Lakish is curious about. Of course, Rish Lakish knows that if chibas hakodesh touches something else, it will be tamei midirabanan. Or, I guess in this case, it would probably be the chibas hakodesh would be. I guess because we're talking about tamei other things. That if the chibas hakodesh touched other things, it would be so. If the chibas hakodesh, for example, touches truma or something, or I guess other kodesh, you would not eat it, but you also would not burn it. So that's, of course, midirabanan. Rish Lakish would say that. Ki kami bayale, what he wants to know is lisrof. What Rish Lakish, of course, Rish Lakish is saying that if the chibas hakodesh, he acknowledges that the chibas hakodesh touches something else, at the very least, midirabanan, you would be tole. You would say, don't eat it, but don't burn it. What Rish Lakish wants to know is about burning it. Rish Lakish wants to know, do you in fact actually burn it? Sure, of course, by default we would say, don't do anything, don't eat it, don't burn it. But Rish Lakish, what he wants to know is, do we say that the chibas hakodesh is metame other things mida oraisa, and that when it's matame those other things, you burn it because it's tame mida oraisa. Okay, so that's what Rish Lakish wants to know. Rish Lakish wants to know about on a deoraisa level, that when we say that chibas hakodesh, that when you have korbanis, and we say that automatically, for example, the clump of dry flour in the mincha, and we say that because of chibas hakodesh, it can become tameh. And Rish Lakish is saying, can it be matame other things? Mida oraisa can it be matame other things? So mechlal the chibas hakodesh deoraisa. So that implies that the concept of chibas hakodesh is mida oraisa. Essentially, what Rish Lakish is asking is that when we say chibas hakodesh, is that even to the extent that if it touches other kodesh, you would burn it? That when we say chibas hakodesh is deoraisa, to what extent? Just in that it itself is tamei midoraisa, or even that it can be matame other things midoraisa. But minolan, how do we know bichlal that chibas hakodesh is a deoraisa concept? Ilem, if you can tell me, that the pasuk says that any korbanis, any kodesh that touches anything tamei becomes tamei. So the pasuk says that korbanis can become tamei. So hi basar. The iskasha b'mai. Okay, so the Torah says that korbanos can become tummy. Great. So if tumah, if a dead sheretz touches a korban, it becomes tummy. But why? How is it mukhshal l'kabel tumah? Sure, you have a korban. It was slaughtered. A dead mouse touched it. It becomes tummy. But how? How did the korban become mukhshal l'kabel tumah? Ilem the iskasha b'dam. If you can tell me, well, when you slaughtered the animal, the dam was machshir l'kabel tumah. But we learned on Daf Lamed Gimel, Amr B'Yochanan, minayin the dam kachim she'enom machshir. How do we know that the blood of korbanis is not machshir l'kabel tumah? She'nemar lo sochlenu alayis tishbechenu kamoyim. Dama nishbach kamoyim machshir she'enu nishbach kamoyim eno machshir. That only blood that is nishbach kamoyim, only blood that you spill on the floor is machshir l'kabel tumah. Korban blood that is received in a klisharis is not machshir l'kabel tumah. So how is this animal machshir l'kabel tumah to become tummy from a dead sheretz? It's not from the blood when you shecht it, because that blood is not machshir l'kabel tumah. Well, in the Azara, to the north of the Mizbeach, there's all sorts of, there's a whole butcher operation going on there. There's rings to restrain the animal's head while you're slaughtering it. There are hooks to hang up the animal while you're flaying it and skinning it and cutting it up. There are tables to handle some of the cutting up of the animal. There's everything you need over there. And there's water that would be used to wash things in that butcher area as well. So maybe, how did the korbanos become mukshal l'kabel tumah? Via water in the base mitbechaya. V'amr Rabbi Yossi Bab Chanina mashge beis mit bechaya lo dayan shein dachan ela shein machshirin. But 1 second, Rabbi Yossi Bab Chanina says that when it comes to the mashkin in the base mit bechaya, that we just, this butcher area, lo dayan shein dachan, they are pure, they are tahor, ela shein machshirin, they are not machshir. So it can't be, therefore, that the meat became mukhshir from this water in the base mitbechaya. So it can't be from the blood during shchita, because that's not machshir, and neither is the water in the base mitbechaya. V'chitema tirgma adam, and if you're going to tell me that when Rabbi Yossi Bab Chanina says that the mashkin in the base mitbechaya are not machshir l'kabel tumah, that's specifically blood, v'amashke ka'amar. No, but he says mashke beit mitbechaya, any of the liquids in the beit mitbechai, in the butcher area. So therefore, how did this animal become mukhshar l'kabel tumah if it's not being mukhshar from its blood, nor from the water in the base mitbechai? So elalav de iskasha b'chibas hakodesh. So it must be, says the Gemara, that the korban became tameh just because it was mukhshar l'kabel tumah simply from chibas hakodesh. And the Torah is saying that it could become tameh. So we see that the concept of chibas haTorah is already in chibas hakodesh is already in the Torah is Mida Oraisa. But Vidilma Kidrav Yehuda Amashmua. But wait a second. Maybe that the way that the animal became Mukhshal L'Kabel Tumah is like Rabbi Yehuda Amashmua, Rabbi Yehuda Amashmua, Kilon Sha'aisa Lo Parish Zif Shlamim. For example, if he had a cow, he's bringing a korban shlamim, a cow, and because he was bringing it as a korban shlamim, and he's going to get the meat, and he's going to get the hide, so he wanted to, Ve'avir Benachal, so he brought it through a stream before bringing it to be slaughtered in the Beis Hamikdash, so that it would drink from the stream, and that would make it easier to skin the animal, because after all, he's going to be getting the meat, he's going to be getting the skin, and he has an interest in making sure that the cutting up and the processing of the animal is going to go as smoothly as possible. So he passed through a stream on the way to the Beis Hamikdash to go and shecht in the Beis Hamikdash. And when he slaughtered it, there was still some water from the stream on the animal, and it got on the meat, and it was machshir lekabel tumah. So maybe that is out. So when the pasuk talks about kodshim becoming tameh, how is it machshir lekabel tumah? Maybe it was brought in a stream before it was slaughtered, and then the water from the stream got on the meat. So it's not necessarily because of chibas hakodesh. So then how do we know that chibas hakodesh is mida oraisa? Elami seifa. Rather, the pasuk continues ve'abasar kotar yochal basar. That the pasuk continues and says ve'abasar another time. Right? The pasuk says ve'abasar ashiriga b'chotame lo ye'achel b'eish yisarif ve'abasar again kotar yochal basar. That second ve'abasar is extra lirabos eitzim ulevona, to teach about wood and frankincense, that they can also contract tumas ochlin in the Beis Hamikdash. I don't understand. How could they contract tumas ochlin? You're not going to eat them. Rather, it's the chibas hakodesh. So when the pasuk says ve'abasar, to include Eitzim and Levona, wait a second, but to include Eitzim and Levona in the Tumas Ochlin, but they're not Ochlin, how are they going to be Makabel Tumah? Chibas HaKodesh, the pasuk is therefore teaching, I don't know what the word I'm thinking of is, but basically what the pasuk is saying is that the Eitzim and Levona can also contract Tumah. And how do they become Mukhshal L'Kabel Tumah? Chibas HaKodesh. Hachanami, and therefore here also by Korbanos and by this dry clump of flour in the Mincha, Chibas HaKodesh Machsharta, so it becomes Mida Oraisa, Mukhshal L'Kabel Tumah, because of Chibas HaKodesh. So now the question is, Kimani Chibas HaKodesh Lefsula de Gufe Aval Lemimna Be Rishon V'Sheni Lo Odilma Lo Shna. And therefore, back to our question, fine, now that we've established that Chibas HaKodesh is Machsheres Mida Oraisa, so when it becomes Tameh, is it only Tameh to the extent that you're not allowed to eat it, or even to the extent that you're Matameh other things, Teku, it's a tie. Friends, that was Daf Lamed Vav, Daf 36 of Masechta Chullin. The first section of today's daf, we learned about when blood gets on a gourd. While you're slaughtering an animal, blood squirts on a gourd. So Rebbe says that, well, that gourd will be mukhshar l'kabel tumah. We said that according to Rebbe, yeshno l'shchita mitchila v'ad sof, that the shchita begins when you begin slicing. Therefore, when you began slicing, that was already part of the shchita, and it's dam shchita, and it'll be machshir l'kabel tumah, as the pasuk says, ala arz tishpechenu kamoim, and it'll be treated like water, it'll be machshir l'kabel tumah. Reb Shimon had said that shchita is machshir, blood is not, and therefore he says that the gourd is not machshir l'kabel tumah. And Reb Chia says tolin, it's pending. And the question is, what exactly does that mean? Reb Papa had said what pending means is that it depends. If the blood is on the gourd throughout the shchita, so then we will say that, so then Reb Chia would say, of course, it is mukhshar l'kabel tumah, right? Well, let's say this. According to Reb Papa, Reb Chia holds that ein l'shchita ela levasof, that it's considered shchita at the end of the shchita, and therefore, if the blood is on the gourd throughout the shchita, so then it was there also at the end of the shchita, and the gourd will be mukhshar l'kabel tumah. But if you had cleaned off the blood after slicing through the trachea, but before the esophagus, well then, at the end of the shechita, when you got back to the shechita and you completed it, there was no longer blood on the gourd, and therefore there was no dam shechita. At no point was there dam shechita, because when the blood was there, it wasn't yet complete. You hadn't yet completed the shechita, and it wasn't considered dam shechita, so therefore it's not machshir l'kabel tumah, according to Rav Papa in that case. And therefore tolin means, according to Rav Papa, according to Rav Chia in that case, therefore Rav Papa explains that tolin simply means it depends if there was blood on the gourd at the end of the shechita or not. Rav Ashi says, however, that when Rav Chia says tolin, that is a permanent state. It's an indefinite state of tolin. It's that we simply don't know what to do, and that's because, says Rav Ashi, according to Rav Chia, he's not sure if it is ein l'shchita el vasof or yeshna l'shchita mitchila v'ad sof. So he simply doesn't know what to do, and therefore he says if that gourd becomes tumah and it's truma tmeya, you would not eat it, nor would you burn it, because we are besuffic about it. We then discussed the tumah of chibas hakodesh. First of all, it's the oraisa. The tumah of chibas hakodesh is mi de oraisa. We learned that out from the extra word of ve'abasar, by the Eitzim and the Levona, that they are mukhshal l'kabel tumah by chibas hakodesh, and the same would apply to this, all kodesh, including this clump of dry flour that we were discussing. So that's midoraisa. And the question is, to what extent if kodesh, which is mukhshal l'kabel tumah because of chibas hakodesh, if it then becomes tamei, to what extent? Is it simply that you can't eat it, or can it even be mitami or other things? That ultimately was unclear. Friends, that was Daf Lamed Vav, Daf 36 of Masechta Chulin. I hope you enjoyed. Have a great Shabbos, I guess.